Okay, good afternoon. I am Anto. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon as we try and figure out what the future lies for smarter buildings. So it's really good to have you with us today. In case you're wondering who we are, our profiles are on mondaylive.org. And also note that views expressed here in this hour are personal, not of any company or organization. Keep that in mind. And let's make it interactive with the Zoom chat as always. That's always great. And if you want anything from this slide deck, it's also available on the homepage of mondaylive.org. So today we are starting a new month of May 2026. And our theme for this month is getting back to basics. So we'll get on that path today. It could be quite interesting. And specifically today, our normal news and trends chit chat and getting back to basic. And what we really want to talk about today is basic can mean different things to different people. So what is basic to each of us? And we'll just go around the table and have a discussion of the different types of basics that we all have. And hopefully some interesting conversations after that. But before that, as always, I'm going to hand it over to Ken Sinclair. What's going on, Ken?
As always, Anto, lots. I've taken it and I'm talking about the data movement basics because that's what I see as one of the big changes that's going on in our industry. Over there on the left-hand corner, top, I've got a article that is from our contributing editor, Thomas, and he's talking about commissioning and the interactions there. And I think how he's using AI to do takeoffs and other functions with AI. And I think that's an important message that we all have to give in the basics. And we have to take our basic projects and our basic problems that we have every day. And I think we're all starting to use AI as a solution. And I think sharing those solutions is very productive because it often lets the folks see exactly what they're going, and it often also triggers something that they could do with AI that they hadn't thought of. So I think that's worthwhile. The one below that is the summary of last week's Monday Zoom, the middle of the stack where either the AI works or guesses. And what I've done to that is I've dropped an event on there. The Web Summit Vancouver gathers people writing the next chapter of global innovation. And this is a very software-orientated convention. And the reason it's there in the middle of our page is that one of our sponsors from Brazil is actually presenting their product as part of the global innovation and this whole concept of looking at buildings as digital assets. So I think that's a message that we're walking across the floor or we're being pulled across the floor. We are becoming the IT industry, we are becoming the web industry. And so it kind of changes our focus as we move forward. So that's another data movement in my mind. Below that, we've got one of the projects that Kimon was working on, Beyond Integration, joining data meetings for smart buildings. And it's a great discovery he's made there is that can actually integrate things that he didn't even know were integratable and didn't even know existed. So I think that's a great solution, and we're building that in that article, identity over integration. And that article actually links to some of Kimon's very strong posts on LinkedIn as well. The other thing that I had Gemini do is because I was struggling to still try and understand these information graphs, and it created this graphic and a little bit of a short article helping me explain. And I was figuring that I'm struggling with this. There's probably other folks out there that are kind of struggling with this new way of moving our basic data. And Kimon has always been a fan of knowledge graphs. And now I understand a little bit better, and maybe you can as well. The one below that is efficiency is money. That is basically a too long did not read of the presentation we did in Las Vegas, and just basically how smart buildings pay off. I think that is one basic thing we all need to do is we need to be all the stuff we're doing. We have to relate how is it making the buildings better? How is it making the buildings more cost effective? We have to keep focused on that. And we've got the LinkedIn to our AHR Vegas sessions all there, and they're now all online, so you can look at any one of those. Another one, now moving over to the other side of the page, to the right-hand side of the page, starts at the top, getting back to basics, where our head's at. C4SB, all the good work they're doing. One below that is an article, BACnet Control Supports Continuous Development of an Interoperable Training Platform. And this is an interesting thing. They gave him one of these devices, and he basically created a training program and platform out of it. I think there's been, by the amount of interest it's got on LinkedIn, it's obviously something we need to talk about more. I think Anto pointed out that Symmetrics has a new article online, which we'll have to get on maybe next week. The one below that, well, there's the RBS is right on now. That's in Australia. That's the equivalent of AHR Australia. That's on right now in Melbourne. And Hello Cloud BIM World is linked to a post that Kimon did online. And also your building already has the answers, you just can't chat with it. And that's, again, some of the basic things in my mind that are happening, these basic movements of how we used to work and how we are going to be working in the future. So that's kind of my twist on your theme. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you, Ken. Rick, what's going on, Rick?
Hey, well, lots going on with C4SB also, as usual. And wanted to just feature this Thursday is First Thursday. So 3 o'clock Central will be the first town hall, and there is a link to the meeting. I would say invite, but that's not what it is. What is it? The calendar notification is on c4sb.org. Find that logo, and you'll find find a clickable link to be able to add the meeting to your calendar. What we intend to do there is, and we'll talk a little bit about basics as we go through Monday Live here, but we're going to do like an overview of the basics of each of the working groups and interest groups that are part of C4SB. And we'll kind of dig in, if we have time, we're going to dig into some of the fundamentals that are behind some of these really, really in the weeds, deep working group efforts, but try and make them understandable, connect the dots between the basics and the really, really in the weeds, future facing work that's being done so that more people can understand the significance of what is happening in the different working groups and how it can potentially apply to their careers or to their company or to their customers. And that's pretty much it for C4SB update.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Kimon, you put in a couple of slides you want to speak to.
Yeah, I wasn't on the call last week. I was on a plane actually, and I was coordinating this even from the plane. But the Asset Leadership Network, the Global Asset Management Summit last week, who I think Zara's on the call too, but she was there as well. Many others were there. And we decided to create a very simple exercise. From the PA work that we keep mentioning, we have a model that's been used for development and testing with live data from PAE. And we said, what's the simplest exercise we can give others that have no idea about what this project was about? And we said we have an RDF file with a unique ID in it, global unique ID for each element, the spaces, the sensors, everything else. Just take that data, do something to it, add something else to it, and give it back to us, maintain those IDs. And that sounds very simple, but that's often very lost in when different applications try to collaborate with each other, either intentionally or by accident. you would say, well, that's not in my schema. Why do I need this ID in my application? Well, you need it to be able to pass the data between systems. It's like a social security number, as we described. So if you strip away the ID, you can't say, well, I've added a piece of data to this piece of equipment in the building and giving it back. So that was the exercise. We'll give you a turtle file. We'll also give you a table of data too, if you want to just look at that. Add something to it with your application, give it back to us, or you can do a lot more. You can even build an app on top of this, which actually one team did. They actually built a whole new app. We created a simple use case of there's a fire in the building. How does emergency responders get to that piece of equipment to shut off the electricity, for example? Go to the next slide, maybe. And in the background of all this basic data, there's a lot of other things happening. All the things that are happening within the PAE building with Skycentrics, with other participants. More development was happening in parallel. In other words, multiple teams were working with the same data, many of them for months, others that just jumped into the 6-day exercise, and we kept things in alignment, which is a lesson in itself. If we keep it simple, you can actually collaborate. And the simplest collaboration is let's agree on maintaining that ID, and then you can add a lot of other things to the knowledge graph. So if we simplify it to that point, then it becomes very apparent that if we all agree to do at least do that, then you can add other applications to it. You can add other use cases. You can add other knowledge graphs, or create a whole different application in parallel to the functionality that we already have been building in an open format. So, and this is going to keep going. This was just a 6-day exercise, but as you all know, we've been going at this for months now, and we're going to continue to expand it now that we've had more collaboration across teams. So basics, in other words, enable more complexity if you want to, but if you don't have the basics down, no collaboration happens. You create more silos.
Good pivot
And that's
there,
it.
Kimon.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other input from anyone?
Yeah, I have something I want to mention. We're actually in the talks with a large OEM thermostat vendor. Probably the largest one in the world is Pelican Wireless thermostats. They claim they have 1 million instances around the world. Yeah, and it was kind of funny. Last week, I wrote an interface to a gateway interface, and I actually helped Pelican write their API in 1999, and it's still CGI XML. Same interface that I wrote for them 27 years ago. Up to speed. We got an interface going with them, talking about OEM partnerships, and they're just like, sometimes you got to just use what's there and get stuff moved. 1 million thermostats, CGI, XML.
Okay. Thank you, Keith. Anyone else? All right. So we are getting back to basics. That's the whole idea for this month. But for this month, we sort of need to remind ourselves that we're all heading in one specific direction, and that direction, that destination is smarter buildings. Right? So the framing for this week for today is what is basic to you for each of us, because it could be very different, because there are different aspects that would actually, which is what we've been talking about for years now, that will make a building smarter. So from my perspective, since I have the mic, what is basic to me, and I think this is really a journey that started back in 1980. I think I was trying to remember the other day, last week. But what's basic to me and what continues to be basic is just the notion of connecting two systems together to do something very specific, and being able to be very sort of structured about that sort of process. Because to me, this sort of complexity that we're sort of seeing is all about lots and lots of different systems, obviously each of them quite complex. And my basic is connecting two systems that that really were not designed to speak to each other, which is kind of the journey. How do you go about that so you can actually achieve some specific use case? So that's my basic, and obviously it continues to permeate in terms of into the stuff that we're doing. So that's my input, and would love to hear other people's. So what's basic to you, Anno? I'm looking at you.
I was just about to chime in. I think the one that I'm struggling with is what I'd call number 3, the AI basics, right? Because that's the space. And I was reading a report just this morning that says Gartner reports that 72% of all AI projects are failing to move the P&L statement. And there's a whole bunch of reasons and stuff. And I think one of the challenges is getting back to basics, even in AI, right? I think and it's kind of an interesting article. The guy is actually one of our folks. He talks about the 10%. It talks about the 10% trap, right? With AI today, you can it takes 10 minutes to put a demo together, and looks like it's, produces results and looks great, but it takes 10 months to actually, productize that, put the guardrails around it, and then understand the actual cost of the tokens and everything else that's coming up these days. So a lot of what I'm looking at is getting back to basics in AI in of itself, right? Stop trying to be all things to all people all at the time, all at once. Solve a real problem, a specific thing that is defined, scalable, and has potential to move the P&L, which is the hardest one at the end of the day with AI, right? Is hey, we do all this great stuff, but nothing changes in the P&L statement. And with the latest move of all the costs that the AI companies are doing, it might end up costing me more. So anyway, so that's a big focus of mine, is that getting back to basics in AI. We all got super excited and went over the top and like, okay, fine, terrific. It can do all sorts of good, cool stuff. Now let's go back to the basics and solve something real.
It's interesting because the basic is relatively short term, right? Because
it could, the time frame could be, is the impact.
Yeah.
But more importantly, what we're solving is meaningful and has an impact on the P&L. And it's not about getting rid of people and taking over their jobs, but doing something of value. And so anyway, so I'm hyper focused on getting back to basics in AI.
Kim, what's your basics in this context?
I'm interested in bucket number 3, which is getting back to basics in business. I think that there's AI is extremely powerful, extremely exciting. There's a lot going on, but fundamentally, how it's going to apply to the slow time constant things we deal with, it will certainly apply in many areas, but it will take time to get implemented. And so I'm actually more concerned about regular value propositions and how those value propositions, how the business value propositions are evolving as the world changes. AI is going to be a discontinuous change that changes how many things operate. And I think that we need to recalibrate the business thinking and business models. And other things of today, the current energy shock, these things will all have a bearing over time. But fundamentally, I think how humans organize themselves, where they go to work, how they go to work is about to change in a major way. But therefore, back to basics on business is what I'm interested in. And for me, that primarily means large enterprise customers. How can we help them? They may or may not own large amounts of real estate. Most of them do. And the question is what will become of that real estate going forward? Where will they manufacture? Where will the military choose to have bases when things are, not defensible to drones anymore? How will the world evolve? That's what I'm worried about.
Very important. No doubt about that. Ken, do you want to go next?
Yeah, the control industry and the automated building industry has always struggled with understanding systems and how to control them. Typically, when you get into a control problem, very quickly you get back to the design problem of what was intended. And basics of intention, I think, need to be clarified. And I actually believe that AI can help us clarify the intention of what was in the buildings. Because when we start asking questions, sometimes AI comes back to us and asks us questions, and they're good questions. It says you can't do this if you don't understand how this works. And I think it actually is exposing our thought. The other thing is there seems to be with the group here, there's this thing of changing things over so AI has a permanent position in our basic control. And I think that it more so can help us create solutions, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the solution. And we can use some of our old techniques and hence reduce the amount of tokens and the amount of involvement that we have AI. We can use AI more as a check and basically redefining what are our basic requirements, our basic ROIs for the for buildings.
Interesting. Good. Keith, what's basic to you? What's fundamental?
I'd say I think there's a tendency to oversimplify and trivialize and reduce what basic means. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. I've been involved in managing software development for decades, right? And we had this concept of minimum viable product, right? Minimum viable product. And that always meant when I would start having these conversations with my software developers, it always meant like you've got to give up features. So minimum viable product never meant that it was a maximally simple product. And we get confused about this stuff. Just because something's minimally viable doesn't mean I always talk about this concept of irreducible complexity, right? You can simplify the components of a human eye down to I guess some simple components, but yeah, you take one, there's a minimum complexity that you have to have for the whole unit to function. And I believe it's the same thing in engineering. So I believe a lot of AI projects fail because sometimes we take an academic approach to it because there really isn't anyone that's really, I mean, AI is new to everybody. Like there's no AI experts. I'll be the first to say that nobody is an expert on AI, especially in controls, because it's so new. We haven't even perfected this stuff yet. And I'll go on record saying that. But so you see a lot of people, like I've been up on stage with people, I'm not gonna name any names, but yeah, they're like from, Ivy League schools, and they talk about their academic pursuits of AI using in model predictive control and stuff. And there's always an excuse. Like, so how'd your project turn out? Well, we did all this, we confused busy work and all this stuff that were moving parts with results. And the reason it usually comes up to, well, the building control system is messy. So the data's not structured well, it's dirty, it's unreliable. That doesn't make sense because this same building control data is running chillers, central plants, mission critical, nuclear power plants all day long. So there ends up being a lot of excuses about why it's not working. And we always want to point the finger that I didn't have enough data sufficiency. I kind of feel that getting back to basics means figuring out what value proposition you want to make, and then utilizing whatever the path of least resistance to get there. One final point, Elon Musk talks about the long tail of engineering. So everybody's good at doing like self-driving cars. Like there's a dime a dozen. Everybody's talking about self-driving cars and how many few neurons they need. Yeah, you can get 99% there, but is it safe enough to release on its own, unsupervised without a human safety driver? That's called the long tail, and that's like the last 1%, and that's the most difficult point to get to. So you got to spend cycles really getting down that last 1% to make this viable. You can't just toy with it and play with it. So I'm not sure, what I'm saying, but I think getting down to basics just means getting down to what's the fundamentals and what you're trying to do. And that's really to create value for customers in the built environment.
Okay, so your basic is really just getting the fundamental value of the thing that is
Yeah,
the technology or
because
whatever it
otherwise,
is.
what's the point? It's a
Exactly.
science project. It's a hobby.
Okay. Cool. Interesting. Rick?
Yeah, of course you say basic, and first thing I think about is ones and zeros and basic programming, and honestly, that made me think that's a big part of what I think in terms of back to basics is the ones and zeros, and some of us were talking a few days ago about getting into the weeds of the actual where are the bits, how are they moving, and how do we leverage them, and the ones and zeros are ons and offs. And that, of course, brought me back to follow the bouncing ball here. One of my favorite topics, which is back in night when I was 14 years old, I was using these little guys to turn things on and off. This is an X10 module, if anybody doesn't recognize it. And I was 14. That's almost, what is that, 100 years ago? And so the basics, yes, exactly 100 years ago, the basics of how do we turn things on and off or understand the status of something is something I use my paper route money. If people don't know what a paper route is, you can send me a text.
What's a paper?
It's a paper, right? I use paper route
What?
money to buy X10 modules because I wanted to turn stuff on and off in my parents' basement, which is the only place they'd let me live. But I'm trying to figure out how to use a phone to do it now. And so basics to me, are really that. How do we use ones and zeros from modern devices to do simple things? And that's where my mind drifts to. So a big part of what we're trying to do with C4SB is really getting into the weeds, like I said, the really deep end of the pool relative to the specific things that can be advanced by putting some of the smartest minds on the planet at, looking at a particular problem. But a lot of what is happening in those working groups and what we're doing in the weeds is really comes back to the basics of ones and zeros, ons and offs. And where are those ones and zeros, and how do we keep track of them? So I don't know, that may have all sound weird, but if you want some used X10 devices, that's another $10 a piece.
Very cool. I'm not sure I've ever bought one of those things, but they were definitely fun. Kimon, what's basic to you?
Well, yeah, if I go off the theme that we're talking about here, we know that AI can create a lot of quick apps that are with no use cases. And I think having a specific use case is an important piece here. And I think to Keith's point too, it's not really a minimal thing. It's a focused use case that you can create value from versus just doing cool things, right? And to have the focused use case, if we're talking about smarter buildings, I think the basic is we're really serving the building and the people in the building, right? So the context is the basic, I think. Without that, it just becomes a bunch of ones and zeros with no context or no use case. And I think from a smarter building perspective, we have to kind of stress, and I know we've talked about this before in Monday Live, but and that could be very basic too, which goes back to the exercise that I talked about earlier. You can have just a very basic location of something in the building that relates to something else, then you have a use case there. But if you make it too broad and the Hollywood BIM thing that I keep talking about, then you kind of get lost in, well, we can do a bunch of cool things, but what is the use case of that? Which goes back to understanding what creates value for the occupant in the building, for the owner in the building. And that varies per situation, per building, per location, per time, temporal aspect of it. So there's a lot of complexity having around that, but anchoring it to that location that becomes relatable as a user story to the owner of the building that creates value, that helps you create the apps and not just randomly ask AI to create a bunch of cool stuff.
So the basic thing out of all of that you said was the concept of the context.
The context is one, but then applying the other technologies to that context, and that
To
could
that
again be
context.
could be a very simple thing to. In fact, it's good to keep it simple and then expand it out versus doing something theoretical and complex and having AI, for example, create something magnificent with no use case, and then you can't create value from it.
Because if you're thinking of a context and you're thinking of a context with a number of different systems, then that is where the value can emanate from.
Yeah. And that's
Right.
really the only way to create a humanly understandable use case. Because if you don't say, I am in this space or I am in this location and I'm trying to do A, B, and C to make this room more comfortable or whatever the context is, it becomes very fuzzy. And then you just create kind of a theoretical thing. But we relate to that's our natural and our interface is the environment. That's our user interface as humans, which means it becomes relatable as a story. And if we can tell the story clearly, then you can create solutions that support that story.
Is that really a shared context then? Because it's a context that's shared amongst people that's trying to collaborate around it?
Yeah, well, the physical world is a shared context. It's the real thing, right? But then there's
Right.
also our personal context relating to that of what we're trying to do. Because if you're in just a box of a building, if it's a smarter building, you need to know what that building, why does that building exist, which goes back to this whole RDF and the knowledge graph context. If you don't know why that building exists, then what are you trying to do to it? Are you trying to save energy in a warehouse or in a hospital? It's a different use case and user story, right?
Right. It starts with understanding what the context is.
Understanding the why
Yeah.
and capturing the why is important because that's knowledge. And if we're going to apply AI to that, you need to understand the why. Otherwise, you're just doing stuff.
Okay, so lots of different basics. How do we want to take this forward? Is there any of what we all said surprise anyone here? One surprised that not if something else didn't come up? Nobody mentioned RDF, Rick.
Did I forget to mention RDF?
Just pulling your leg.
It's every other word that I use is RDF most of the time. You got me distracted and excited about X10 stuff. Um, but when Anto was talking about the basics of AI, I almost changed my whole thought there about it's really cool to see everybody get really excited about something, and then everybody kind of not hits a wall, but everybody kind of gets to a point where they realize, oh wow, this is really interesting. There's really big potential, but we may have skipped over some of the basics, and and um, and that's really cool. That's we've in a lot of ways I've been waiting for that, right? Because we knew that there's more complexity to this whole AI thing than what was being glossed over, and it would just kind of wait. You kind of sit back and you just wait and wait and wait for more and more people to realize that there's really some fundamentals that in almost every domain, and we think about our own domain, we think about our own world, we think about cars a lot, apparently. Um, but in every domain, there are these basics that are being overlooked with this race to AI. Um, but that inevitably is now working out that race to AI is people are going, wait, hold on, let's go back and look at the basics and why aren't we seeing ROI on all this, massive investment, and why aren't we able to fundamentally change any sort of business equations or any other equations? And I don't think it would. I hope people don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I hope that what happens is that there's like a moment of reflection of, wait a minute, there's something to this, but how do we make our life's work be enhanced by this new exciting capability. And that's why, okay, so that's why I did go back to the X10. Guess what can't see X10? AI. Right. And again, for those who don't know what X10 is, this is a lamp module. This turns on and off a lamp if it's connected to the right sort of proprietary siloed controller, if that's the case.
Rick explained that it communicates over the power line.
You just did. Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
I think Jim used his paper route money. He didn't ever have a paper
Exactly.
I think and he's not as old as the rest of us, we learned. But I think he had some X10 stuff too. So the X10, end device, the controller and the controller and the field device or whatever we'd call it, communicate over power lines, the power lines that are in your house. Nowadays, we communicate over the air with our devices, but AI cannot see a majority of systems. And what Kimon talked about with, moving everything to knowledge graphs and RDF is something we realize that if you do create an interface for your system that is RDF, now you're one step closer, really close for AI to be able to see your system. So if somebody wants
I think that's great, Rick. The question I have for you is how much is that going to cost today? So let's say we've got the 5.5 million commercial buildings. Somebody's going to come up with a whiz-bang tool that's going to take my BACnet points list and my paper control submittals, run them through AI, and who's going to make me that knowledge graph? How do I get it?
we are demonstrating that at the PAE building. Shocking. How many times do we say that a week?
Yeah.
But we are absolutely demonstrating how that RDF gets created.
That's almost a brand new building in the scheme of the world, right?
Now it's using 15-year-old systems. I mean, it's no different than a 15 or 20-year-old system, but they are modern system. They do have BACnet, they do have Modbus, they do have RS-485 connectability, sure. But we are saying that there has to be some level of better than X10 system connectivity capability. But then if it is somewhat better than that, now we can get it to RDF with just
let's just draw a line and say that the building has BACnet in it, for instance. How am I going to get a knowledge graph? Give me a 15-year-old office building that's native BACnet. How do I get a knowledge graph out of that if I'm an owner?
Yeah, because that's 50% of the industry, folks. So we got 50%, we got millions of buildings that we can access right now. So
right.
Yeah, so that is what is being demonstrated in several different buildings using a version of an IBB, which we all started talking about a long time ago. Now that it's not, the IBB isn't completely built out with all the different capability for management and orchestration and all of that, but the fundamentals of using an IBB to connect to old systems, whether it's any kind of serialized system, that's what we're demonstrating. It gets ingested and turned into a knowledge graph. Now, one of the fundamental things, and this is ultimate basic, and we talked about this on Wednesday, is that a knowledge graph is actually just describing a category of databases. So that the data is being pulled from one system, and then it's being sliced and diced and put into a database that happens to comply with this general description of something called a knowledge graph.
Right.
And the knowledge graph, I'll say fields, even though that's not technically correct, but the fields in the database are actually defined by a dictionary, which I think that's actually a technical term, that says here's the sort of arrangement that you should have for the fields in this database. And we've been kind of getting really, really specific about the types of databases and the types of dictionary and the types of ontology, but we kind of skipped over some of the basics. So the fact that a knowledge graph is just describing a category of database types. And all those databases, if they are falling into that category, they have this additional meaning that's been added into the database. The fact that that's now the case means that you can actually write apps, you can use AI, you can understand the data better. And
I'm bought into that, but I'm a
Yeah.
building owner. I've got a 200,000 square foot tilt up office buildings in the suburbs, 15-year-old BACnet in it. Who am I going to go pay to come make me a knowledge graph? Is that my local building contractor? Is that a consultant? Who comes and makes me my knowledge graph? And when I get it, what do I do with it?
So a lot of systems, including like KNX, and we've been learning this, are already storing data in a database that is a knowledge graph style database.
Mm-hmm.
So there's already a lot of systems that are already in turtle files, which are a turtle file is the output from or one of the output file formats from a knowledge graph style database. That's a mouthful. I'm sorry for it being so complicated, but it's really not. So what we're demonstrating at PAE is the fact that you can put a simple box onto an existing network of devices. If it's Modbus, BACnet, different styles of BACnet, queries that network or it queries that device, and it saves the data in a knowledge graph. And that's part of the deployment of the IBB or the.
And to make it actually simpler than that, Rick, if it's okay, if we use PA again, but it could be to Jim's question. This goes back to my context question, right? If you have BACnet in a building, that owner has some kind of information of we have 10 rooms in this building and we have 3 devices in these locations. That's the beginning of a knowledge graph. It's almost like the minimum that you kind of need that context. And then if you add where that signal is coming from, which is important, if there's BACnet in the building, it's doing something to the building in some location. That's part of a knowledge graph. And that could be just a spreadsheet, which is the exercise that I talked about earlier. I give you a spreadsheet with IDs of spaces. You give me a list of BACnet devices associated with that space. Boom, you have the beginning of a knowledge graph because I can query it and ask where are things located. Now it still needs a lot more to it, but that's really the minimum that you need. And that information already exists in the building and the systems in the building.
No, I agree completely. Come on. And, basically, if you take the points list from the building automation system, that's going to at once give me a list of where all the sensors and actuators are.
Yeah.
And to some extent, the hierarchy of how they're connected. I understand that can be developed, and I understand that if other topological information and static information from as-builts, that can be contributed. What I'm struggling with is I'm that guy in the building. Who am I going to hire to do this? Because I don't have anybody that knows what it is. I get the concept that I want my data in this format so that I'll be able to use AI or other applications to get at it, right? More easily. Question is that do I hire a master systems integrator? Who is the guy that is going to come do this for me? That's the question I'm asking.
The people that are already touching the systems in the building, whether you're maintaining them, whether it's in a work order system, whether it's a new installation or a renovation. And
so
the
your
owner,
controls contractor is going to be able to get some tools and then provide this
part of it, right?
Graph for me.
That we're trying to, as rapidly as possible, create this digital building profile, which will be like a layout or a map of how to find the different knowledge graphs that may exist or how to create knowledge graphs from existing systems, and then how demonstrations of how they can be tied together. It's really an IT function, so it's a skill set that some systems integrators already provide. It's going to be a matter of owners being able to say, I want that. And then the systems integrators, and I see that, Brian's on here, or he was, and some other master systems integrators or people with that sort of experience can potentially talk to. If an owner says, I want the data stored in this sort of database format because it'll make application creation easier in the future, it's turning out to be fairly simple to find experts on knowledge graphs and database knowledge graph style databases. It's just that, and again, that's why we're trying to create this template as rapidly as possible to be able to say, okay, well, here's an example of what the knowledge graph looks like for the PAE building. Now, who do you hire to do that? Well, it's either a mashup of some of your existing contractors, or it's bringing in somebody who understands the nature of knowledge graph data architectures.
You can feed it through AI. You can feed your spreadsheet that has 10 things on a list with IDs on it, and say it will create a knowledge graph. I mean, some of it better than others, but it's essentially a list of things with IDs on it, another list of things with IDs on it. The owner saying, I want to use these IDs when I hire a master systems integrator or installer or whatever. Use the IDs that I have in my building, add other assets to it, add BACnet, whatever it might be, but use these IDs, which was the exercise that I talked about that we did last week. And it worked.
One of the things that I've had a bit of a aha moment, Jim, in my group and my teams, not my teams, but the field engineers in my organization, and we've got, I don't know, some 17, 18,000 of them. So one of the things we underestimated and became a good surprise and a interesting surprise to us is how much our existing technicians, especially the younger ones, are using AI these days to do their job, which is I've found really fascinating. And a whole spectrum of stuff, right, they're using it for. And of course, we found them, doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and needed some education on what they can and can't do. But by and large, we kind of initially, when we were doing some of this, like the stuff that you're talking about, we kind of took the approach of, we need to build all the tools for those techs to do that type of work. And we're finding that no, they're actually out there doing it already. Now, not everyone, right? I mean, it's a growing percentage, and it's growing fast. And it's one of those, we find a couple of folks on one account using it, and all the other ones want to know what he's doing and how he's doing it. They're teaching each other, pretty much at pace. And so one of our surprises is how fast these techs and engineers are starting to use the AI tools to do some of this basic stuff. And to Kimon's point, I mean, they're really good getting adept at just taking CSV files or files and just throwing it at Claude or whatever and asking it the questions and coming back with the answers. And they still have to curate it, right? And still have to make sure it's what it is supposed to be. But it was surprising to us how many folks are actually doing that.
It comes natural to them.
Yeah.
Just embrace the tools. Like, come on, like let's just go back to the ice cream, the story about the Northgate Market. I asked my daughter Ari to go get some floor plans, and she comes back Monday with all fully digitized. She's like, Dad, I found this thing called Matterport. I downloaded it to my iPhone. I took all these 3D pictures. I got this thing called a DXF file that I exported. Like, she had never done that before, and she just did it on her own volition. She just figured it out in a weekend.
Yeah,
they're naturally. And I didn't even have to show her anything. Not that I could even add any value. Like, I thought when you use Matterport, you had to use like a special camera, like all expensive. She's like, no, I downloaded it to my iPhone. I scanned the whole store. Here's what you need. And Kimon, we're up and running, 2 days later?
Yeah, we just married that with the simple plan we had. So it's the simple IDs again. So you had signals. We had the plan from Ari. We had the IDs and the data, the IDs of the rooms, and all of a sudden you had the first version of it, essentially a digital twin, in a few days.
48
That's a lesson. Yeah, which goes back to the minimal. If you keep it simple, you can do pretty powerful things quickly. But if you get lost in the complexity.
Yeah, I want to focus back on that and to the subject we're talking about. That's the key point I'm finding as well, Kimon, is like even the engineers and technicians we talk to, they're not doing world-changing stuff. They're just doing what they've been doing, simple things that has taken, that they might not have entertained in the past because they didn't have the tools, or they're waiting for someone to build the tool, and they're just jumping on AI and going like, I'll just use Claude and I'll just sort it out myself, and they do. And kind of like, wow,
So Steve has joined us again on his phone. Steve, do you want to contribute to this?
Yeah, what Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
No, you can't see.
Okay, super. All right, so in defining my version of BASIC, because in listening to you guys, I think we're actually very much aligned in terms of where things are going. And I just want to, I guess, point out to you from a BASIC standpoint, the evolution, going back to the 80s, it was about DDC. The 90s was about communicating over networks, and then those networks moving from proprietary to open in the first decades of the 2000s. And of course, concurrently with that was the basic requirement to get that data up and over the internet. Well, so what you've all been saying is that the basic requirements for this current generation that we're in, this current time we're in, is that we've got to be AI friendly. We've got to be AI ready, right? So the basics of control haven't fundamentally changed. We still need to have both user programmability as well as in some where possible, configurable controls, and that part is actually getting improved through the efforts of ASHRAE right now, as you guys know. So in that sense, we're better defining what control algorithms need to do and how they need to look so that there's some consistency out in the market. So there's that redefinition of BASIC. But what I'm suggesting is that we're just in a transition period here where we have to recognize we're moving to AI as a standard way of having our control systems interoperate in buildings. And yeah, it's a learning curve. It was a learning curve for all of the things that preceded that I just referenced quickly. And so I'm very confident that over the next few years, we're going to go through that learning curve successfully. But there are challenges, and so what else is new? So I just think whether the approach that we're taking with RDFs or what Keith is doing in his business, it's going to play itself out. But ultimately, the basic concept here is that the controls of the future need to be AI enabled or AI ready, however you want to describe it.
I'm hearing the term AI native more and more these days. Maybe that works.
Right.
Cool. So we've had quite a range of sort of thoughts in terms of what BASIC means. And I think if you put it all together, it's basically, obviously, what Monday Live is. We have different perspectives. Really interesting. Does this sort of capture what you were expecting? Because for the last few weeks on our Wednesday calls, you've been sort of encouraging us to go down this path. You're muted.
Sorry, I was concerned that we would head off into the wild world of mechanical design and systems, and I thought that really wasn't the place for this particular group of talent to talk, and the exploring how we can better use AI, I think is, and there's a lot of interesting developments as were stated by everybody, and I think we need to explore more of those, and I think we need more examples. The PAE is an amazing demonstration, but there are other demonstrations, and I think we should move forward in the months coming up and start to talk about those, talk about taking the basic principles of how the buildings work, not so much getting into the gory details of whether it's an induction system or whether it's a chilled beam system and all that kind of stuff, because that's kind of another subject matter. I think that the expertise we have here is how to interface with these basic systems once they're defined, and maybe actually trying to define some of the basics of of communication might be a useful exercise as well.
So Jim, your basic concern was the business of this industry. And now we've sort of gotten to the point where AI nativity is kind of how we think we want to frame it to do basic things. That's kind of the two things that I've sort of connected on this call. Do you think that's going to work from the business of the industry and adapting to what it needs to adapt to?
Absolutely. The real question I have is what other value can we create? We've been talking for years about energy, predictive maintenance, operations, regulatory issues, comfort, integration with other systems, life safety. We can go on, but the question is, all right, what's new, right? Because human behavior has changed. A lot of us don't go to an office anymore. Our commuting patterns are changed. Our travel patterns have changed. What is the new value that we can create, getting back to basics, that people need as life and as times change? And that's what I'm really interested in. Those are the basics I'm looking for, because we've been beating these same value propositions to death over the years. And frankly, they don't make a lot of people's socks roll up and down, right? And one of the fundamental problems we've always had as an industry is we routinely bring 10 or 20% improvement to problems. And, for discontinuous adoption of new technologies, you need factors of 2 or factors of 10 improvement. How are we going to find applications using this whiz-bang beautiful technology that revolutionizes the way people use buildings?
Or
That's
don't
what I
use
think the
buildings?
basics are.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jim. We have a term internally we call earning the commute, right? Which is, what do I need to do to earn your commute to come back to the building? But I think there's also some realization is there's a whole bunch of folks who'll probably you'll never put enough there to earn the commute. So what do you do as a difference too, right? So it's not only about getting the people in, but also if you don't get the people in or you don't get the numbers, what do you do with the building, and how do you do your point, right? One of the other value propositions that comes with the change of how we work,
Right.
moving forward.
But
It's
to me,
no
that's
longer as simple as black or white. There's a lot of gray areas in between.
I completely agree. And to me, that's the most fundamental basic is, why do we have buildings and what are we going to do with them? And under what circumstances? They're not going away, don't get me wrong. But we're in a very dynamic period as to the fundamentals of what you do with a building right now. I mean, I think that architects should maybe be even thinking about this more than we are.
So the basic thing to all of us is actually buildings themselves. Duh. So we do have an architect. So, exactly. So we do have an architect. Kimon, you're muted. You want to chime in as an architect? You can wrap this up as well, because we're nearly at the
Yeah,
end.
actually, as an art, to do what you just described, Jim, the building needs to be able to at least give us some basic information about itself. If it's mute, then we have to go find it and have to send people to it to find out what it does.
Mhm.
If it has some kind of signal, even if it's not perfect, at least we see it's there. In fact, we've had this problem with government agents. They don't even know the building exists. It's on their books, and you go there and it's not there. So even basic stuff, does the building exist? Is it occupied? What's it being used? How much energy? Just basic stuff. What's the condition of it? How old is it? Which goes back to the fire scenario that we did last week. How old is it? What's the structure? Is it wood? Is it steel? How long is it going to be before the floor collapses when there's a fire? Do I send somebody up there to save people?
Mhm.
Nothing else matters in that scenario. It's just, am I going to die going into the building or not? And if the building can speak even simple stuff, and some of it is going to be more advanced. PA is obviously an extreme example, but just very simple information can give you a lot of good action items to do with the building. Do I decommission it? Do I tear it down, build new? Do I renovate it? All that stuff. You need some kind of information in the building to speak. And if we have smarter buildings, they have to be able to have some kind of a voice, whatever it is, machine readable at least, so we can access it.
Okay, I think that's a good wrap up for this session. I think it's been an interesting session. Thanks all. Thanks to the audience for being here, and we'll be back next week. And I hope you all have a great week. Bye.
Cheers all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.